Have you ever stopped to think that maybe the cruelest lie you ever heard in your life wasn't shouted at you or thrown in your face, but whispered with a serene gaze, a gentle smile, and maybe even a soft touch on your face? Have you ever considered that the deepest form of deception, the one that truly leaves a mark, isn't the one that disappoints you explicitly, but the one that quietly infiltrates your most noble feelings? Because sometimes what hurts isn't the slap, it's the hug that hides an intention. It's not the cold silence, but the sweet words spoken with hidden motives. Maybe what destroys you comes with what you most long for: attention, care, emotional validation. Things that touch us right where we are most vulnerable. The desire to be seen, understood, loved. But what if Nietzsche was right? What if the greatest danger in a relationship isn't sudden abandonment, but subtle enchantment? What if the real blow isn't direct, but invisible, slow, and disguised as love? What if what you believe is affection is actually strategy? That's what we're going to talk about in this video. Here, you'll understand how a woman can deceive you in a way that disturbs your soul, not necessarily out of conscious malice, but because of something Nietzsche saw as a disturbing truth about the human condition. The will to power, disguised as charming fragility. And this understanding won't just open your eyes, it could completely change how you see your relationships, how you see yourself, and how you understand the emotional games that often unfold behind an "I love you." If you've ever felt confused, trapped in a relationship where everything seemed right from the outside, but inside something was eating away at you. If you've ever felt guilty for something you couldn't even name, or if you want to understand how sometimes what looks like love might actually be a subtle mechanism of control, then stay until the end. What you're about to hear may be uncomfortable. It may make you revisit moments you'd rather forget. But most of all, it could free you from an emotional prison built with pretty words. And maybe for the first time you'll realize that the problem was never love, but the illusion that everything that comes with affection is automatically true. First point: the theater of fragility. Friedrich Nietzsche once said something provocative: "In true love, the spirit must lead the body." In other words, genuine feelings must come from awareness, from freedom and sincere will, not from mere physical attraction or emotional need. But what happens when love wears a mask? When what should be a bond of mutual growth becomes an arena, a silent battle for emotional power? When the relationship turns into a game, but you didn't know you were playing. This is where Nietzsche dives into a point most people are afraid to touch. Most still believe that feminine seduction comes only from the body, from appearances, soft gestures, or aesthetic charm. But for Nietzsche, that's just the surface. Real seduction, he said, lies in the idea of need, in the role a woman often assumes, consciously or unconsciously, of emotional fragility. She presents herself as sensitive, needy, almost helpless, and that awakens in the man a primitive instinct to protect, that deep unconscious masculine drive to care for, save, protect. But Nietzsche wasn't naive. He saw beyond that. He understood that this fragility is often not authentic. It's a role, a very well-rehearsed script, a theater of delicacy hiding an intention to dominate. And this is where things get complicated. Because this kind of power doesn't arrive with shouting or demands. It comes in whispers, with teary eyes, with phrases that sound sweet but carry a heavy emotional weight. Phrases like, "You're everything to me. I only feel safe when I'm with you. Without you, I don't know what would become of me." These words, spoken with emotion, create a powerful bond. Not a bond of freedom, but of emotional over-responsibility. You start to feel like if you leave, she'll fall apart, and slowly you stop acting by choice and start acting out of guilt. You think you're being loved, but in reality you're being tied down. These words that seem affectionate are often the strongest chains, invisible shackles that cast you in the role of hero. While without realizing it, you're losing your own identity. You become the savior, and at the same time, the prisoner. Nietzsche saw this as a sophisticated form of manipulation, a dynamic where love becomes emotional currency, where fragility is just a mask, and behind it lies the desire to dominate, to stay in control, to ensure you won't leave. And the scariest part, you only realize it when you're already too emotionally invested to fight back. Second important point, the will to power disguised as love. At first glance, Nietzsche's theory may seem harsh, but if you look closely, you might realize it makes more sense than you'd like to admit. For him, every human being, without exception, seeks power. Even when it looks like they're giving, even when they appear generous, loving, devoted. Deep down, there's a hidden desire to win, to dominate the environment around them, to gain an advantage, to avoid losing. And here comes one of Nietzsche's most uncomfortable ideas. Not all giving is real giving. Not all fragility is genuine. Sometimes sweetness is a strategy, and love, a silent battlefield. With women, especially in the social context of his time, which still echoes in relationships today, this will to power doesn't show up as aggression. It doesn't come as direct imposition. It's not explicit domination. It arrives with cunning, with small gestures, with carefully timed silences, with looks that say nothing, but make you feel guilty, with phrases that sound innocent, but trap you emotionally. Nietzsche wasn't accusing, he was describing, observing the subtle dynamics with the cold precision of an emotional surgeon. And that's why he said the perfect woman is a perfect actress. But pay attention, that phrase isn't an accusation of dishonesty. He wasn't saying women are naturally deceitful. What he meant was that throughout history, women had to learn how to survive in environments controlled by men. And because of that, they developed a type of invisible, emotional, psychological power. A power that doesn't force, but moves through emotion. The perfect woman, according to Nietzsche, is the one who deeply understands the effect her gestures, words, and actions have on others. She knows how to appear vulnerable, strategically. She knows how to use emotion as a tool of command, and that's not a character flaw. It's a social construction, an emotional intelligence that's often unconscious, but effective. It's as if she were saying, "I'm not forcing you to stay, but I'll make you feel like leaving would destroy me. I'm not asking for anything, but I'll leave it hanging in the air that if you don't give me what I want, you're betraying me." This is the will to power disguised as love, a psychological game so well hidden that even the one playing it often doesn't realize they're playing. And you, if you're not paying close attention, might mistake manipulation for affection, emotional control for romance, domination for love. And at that point, you've already lost, because you can no longer tell the difference between true love and what is merely a silent but lethal power struggle. Third, and equally important point, the deceiver isn't the one who lies, it's the one who makes you doubt yourself. The most disturbing form of deception isn't when someone blatantly lies to you. Because when a lie is clear, when it's loud, when it's visible, as painful as it may be, you can see it, you recognize it, you identify it, and sooner or later you're able to walk away. But the real danger is the kind of deception that doesn't come with lies. It comes with confusion, with subtle distortions, with actions that don't match the words, with behaviors that leave you questioning, not the other person but yourself. It's when you feel like you're being manipulated, but you can't prove it. You have no evidence, no solid argument, just a discomfort growing inside your chest. And you try to silence it with justifications. You start apologizing. Even when you've done nothing wrong, you say sorry for existing too much, for wanting too much, for noticing too much. You blame yourself for thinking, for feeling, for asking questions. Little by little, you start changing who you are, not because you're growing, but because you're scared, afraid of losing what you believe is love, but might actually be emotional dependency wrapped in affectionate gestures. You repress your essence. You quiet your dreams. You tone down your intensity. All to fit into the space the other person allows you to occupy. Nietzsche would call this emotional decay, a slow, silent process where you begin to wither. From within, where your strength is drained drop by drop until you become a small version of who you used to be. All in the name of preserving a relationship that in reality weakens you. And the cruelest part of all this is that the person who brings you to this point doesn't yell at you, doesn't forbid you, doesn't physically restrain you. The prison is emotional, built with sweet words, well-timed tears. Silences that make you feel like you are the problem, that you are unstable, that you are overreacting, when in fact you're waking up. And the person who appears fragile is actually fierce, not in shouting but in control, in the ability to bend you without ever laying a finger on you. This kind of deception is the hardest to recover from, because it doesn't just destroy the relationship, it destroys your self-confidence, your sense of reality, your ability to trust yourself. And at that point, the one who deceived you didn't just lie. They did worse. They stole your inner compass. They made you doubt the one thing that should never be negotiable, your own perception. There are questions that need to be asked, questions you need the courage to face, not to accuse the other person, but to find yourself again. And one of them is, why does she cry every time you try to leave? Is it really pain? Or is it a way to trap you emotionally, to make you feel that if you walk away, you'll be destroying someone fragile and helpless? Is that crying genuine vulnerability? Or an emotional response crafted to make you give up your own freedom? Another question. Why are you afraid of hurting her? But she never seems worried about hurting you. Why does your pain always seem less important? Why are you the one who holds back, adjusts, adapts, while she allows herself everything, even hurting you, without ever admitting she crossed a line? And more, why do you feel like you owe her something, even when you give your all? Why this constant sense of debt? Why even after giving so much do you always end up feeling like you're not doing enough? Does she really demand all of this directly? Or have you been emotionally conditioned to feel eternally in debt? These questions are uncomfortable, they're difficult, but they're necessary, because maybe she isn't the villain in this story. Maybe she's just repeating unconscious patterns, living out a script she doesn't even realize she's following. But what if the problem isn't her role? What if the real issue is the game you're both caught up in? What if you're playing this game without realizing it? Without knowing there's an emotional board carefully designed with silent rules, where every tear, every silence, every gesture has one goal: to keep you exactly where she wants you. You're not the villain, but you also can't keep being a hostage in a dynamic where love is used as a mask for control. And it all begins when you allow yourself to question. It's important to clarify something fundamental before any rushed judgment. Nietzsche didn't hate women. What he truly despised was illusion, self-deception, the emotional blindness that makes us call love what is actually a silent system of domination. He wasn't attacking femininity. He was attacking the emotional falseness that sets in when we accept relationships based on performances and psychological games disguised as affection. And it was in that spirit that he stated one of his most powerful quotes: "Convictions are more dangerous enemies of truth than lies." Does that sound contradictory? It's not, because look, a lie can be exposed. It can be undone when confronted with facts, but a conviction, A conviction lives inside you. It wears the costume of certainty. It settles in your heart as absolute truth and makes you protect what's destroying you with everything you've got. And that's why the worst kind of deception isn't being deceived by someone else. It's being deceived by yourself. It's believing with every part of you that you're living a love story, when in reality you're drowning in a cycle of emotional manipulation. And why does Nietzsche's philosophy still hold up today? Because it doesn't put the spotlight on the other person. It doesn't point fingers. It doesn't say, look what they did to you. On the contrary, it invites you to look inward, to make the hardest and most necessary move in the life of anyone who wants to be free, to take responsibility for your own emotional choices. This philosophy is uncomfortable because it takes you out of the victim role. It pulls you out of the position of someone who was just deceived, and shows you that at some level you were part of building this emotional prison, maybe out of loneliness, maybe out of fear, maybe because you hoped too much. But you were part of it, and once you realize that, everything changes. Because you finally understand that not everything that looks like love is love. Not all attention is care. Not all fragility is sincerity. Not every act of giving is loving. Sometimes it's just a hidden form of control. Recognizing this pattern takes courage. It takes noticing the details, what is said and what is never said, how you feel after each conversation, how you slowly shape yourself until you no longer recognize who you are. This philosophy works because it's brutally honest, and because it doesn't offer easy comfort, it offers liberation. But first, it demands truth. Let's look at some simple, practical, everyday examples, but deeply revealing ones. You make plans with your friends, a dinner, a quiet night, some time for yourself. She smiles, says it's fine, that you deserve it, that everything's okay, but the next day she's acting strange, cold, distant. You try to start a conversation, but you feel an invisible wall between you. You ask if something's wrong. She replies with a dry nothing. But the mood is already poisoned. You feel like you did something wrong, but you don't know what. And the worst part, she never tells you, never explains, just leaves you carrying the weight of doubt. That's not communication, it's emotional control disguised as permission. She didn't say it was okay because it was. She said it because she knew that if she acted this way afterward, you'd learn to censor yourself, to avoid conflict, even when it's never spoken out loud. You dedicate yourself, work hard, you're always trying to please, you listen, you care, you put in the effort, but it's never enough. She always finds something to criticize. There's always a loose end, a tiny mistake that becomes the main focus. There's always a "why didn't you think of this before?" or a "this shows you don't care that much." Even when you do far more than most would. That's not partnership, that's subtle domination, where she takes on the role of constant evaluator. And you become the student who's always falling short. You live trying to earn approval that never comes, and over time you start believing you are the problem. You love this woman, you really do. And that's why you forgive, that's why you let things slide, that's why you accept behaviors that, if they came from anyone else, you wouldn't tolerate for even a minute. You justify the unjustifiable, you minimize your pain, your discomfort, your boundaries in the name of what you feel, but that isn't love. That's emotional dependency disguised as loyalty. It's when feelings become an excuse to allow subtle abuse. It's when "I love you" serves more to keep the bond than to foster growth. These examples are simple, almost imperceptible, but that's how the cycle starts. With small, silent agreements where you give up pieces of yourself to keep someone who deep down no longer respects you. And the more you give in, the more you lose your voice, the more you lose your center. And the harder it becomes to see that what you're calling love might just be an invisible emotional leash. Nietzsche, despite the harshness of his philosophy, left us with a lesson that holds a brutal kind of beauty. True love should elevate you. It doesn't drag you down, it doesn't shrink you, it doesn't compress you just to fit into someone else's limited space. Nietzsche believed that love, when it's real, when it's mature, when it's free, strengthens you. It pushes you forward. It inspires you to become greater, more aware, more whole. Someone who truly loves you doesn't need you to disappear so they can shine, doesn't demand that you abandon your essence just to keep the relationship alive. Because true love doesn't drain, it doesn't consume, it doesn't turn you into a satellite orbiting someone else. It brings you back to yourself, it reminds you of who you are, and it helps you grow together, not in submission. So if today you feel like something inside you is fading, if your laughter is rare, if your thoughts are tangled, if you feel smaller, exhausted, guilty, lost, pause, breathe, and observe. Observe how you feel around this person. Observe whether your light still shines, or if it's been replaced by silence and fear. Observe if you still recognize yourself in the mirror, or if all that's left is a distorted version molded to please, to maintain, to not lose. Question it. Because often the most destructive deception isn't the one that comes from the other person. It's the one they convince you to accept. It's when you believe you're living a love story, when in truth you're trapped in an emotional prison with walls made of false affection. And the cruelest part of that prison is that you can spend years inside it, believing you're being loved, when in fact you're being erased. So remember, love that asks you to stay silent is not love. Love that demands you exist less is not love. Love that expects you to destroy yourself bit by bit, day by day, to keep the peace is war disguised as affection. And you weren't made to live in war, you were made to live in truth. Never accept a relationship that requires you to betray yourself. Never accept a love that empties you so the other person can feel whole. Question it. Pay attention to the subtle games, and most importantly, be wary of enchantment. Because enchantment blinds you. And when you're blind, you don't see the shackles being fastened. If you've made it this far, it's because something inside you recognized this truth. Maybe a memory surfaced. Maybe you felt a weight in your chest, realizing you've lived, or are still living, this kind of dynamic. And if that's the case, know this: you're not alone. Now I want to hear from you. Comment down below. Have you ever been in a relationship that seemed like love, but slowly revealed itself as a psychological game disguised as affection? Have you ever felt emotionally trapped, even without handcuffs? Have you ever apologized for feeling too much or for wanting to protect yourself? Share your story. Your pain might be the voice someone needed to hear today to wake up. Your experience could be the bridge for someone to escape an emotional prison they can't yet see. And to close, I want to leave you with a simple but powerful question. Do you believe true love requires deep sacrifice? Or do you believe real love is the one that gives you freedom? Leave your thoughts in the comments. Let's keep this conversation going. Because when we speak, we heal. And when we listen with an open heart, we grow.